He said 4 words that shattered everything. I want you gone. Not yelling. Worse than that, calm and cold, like he'd been planning it. She was holding their babies, 3 of them, newborn still so small their eyes barely opened. It was snowing outside, hard, the kind of storm that kills. Please, she whispered, where am I supposed to go? He didn't answer, just grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. His mother's voice cut through the house like glass. Don't beg, girl. You're embarrassing yourself. You never belonged here, and we all knew it. Now he finally sees it too. His sisters stood in the hallway, watching and smiling, one of them actually pulling out her phone like this was a show. She tried to speak, tried to reason, tried to remind him that these were his children, that she was his wife, that she'd done nothing wrong. But he wasn't listening. He never listened anymore. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back to my channel. If you've been watching these stories without subscribing, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what happens next. And drop a comment with where you're watching from. It takes 2 seconds. Now let's continue. He shoved her onto the porch and the cold hit like a fist. She stumbled, twisting her body to protect the babies. Don't come back, he said. You're not welcome here. You never were. The door closed, the lock turned, and through the window she saw them, all of them, standing there watching her freeze. She wanted to scream, to pound on that door, to make them see what they were doing. But she didn't. Because 2 days ago something had happened. Something they didn't know about. A letter had arrived from her grandmother's estate about an inheritance, not small or modest, but life-changing. And it came with something even more valuable. Control over the one thing this family couldn't survive without. She hadn't told anyone because she hadn't had time to process it herself. But now, standing in that snow with her babies crying and her body shutting down from the cold, she understood exactly what that letter meant. It meant power, real power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits. She turned away from that house, away from the people who tried to destroy her, and she walked into the storm. Not because she was broken, but because she knew something they didn't. Storms end, doors unlock, and sometimes the person you throw away comes back, not to beg or plead, but to take everything. And when that moment came, when they finally realized what they'd done, it would already be too late, because what happened next didn't just ruin them, it erased them. Clara's wedding day had been beautiful. The kind of day she'd dreamed about since she was a little girl. White flowers everywhere, soft music playing. Adrian's hand warm in hers, as he promised to love her forever. She remembered looking into his eyes and thinking, this is it. This is where my life really begins. 6 months later, standing in the kitchen of his family's mansion with her hands shaking as she tried to brew coffee the way Matilda liked it, Clara wondered where that man had gone. The Adrian who had kissed her forehead and called her his angel was gone, replaced by someone who barely looked at her anymore. Someone whose eyes had turned cold and distant. Someone who flinched when she touched his arm. She didn't know when it happened. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. But somewhere between the wedding and now, she had lost him. Clara, darling. Matilda's voice cut through the silence like a blade wrapped in silk. Clara turned to see her mother-in-law standing in the doorway, arms crossed, lips curved into that smile that never reached her eyes. That coffee smells burnt. Were you not paying attention again? Clara glanced at the pot. The coffee was fine. It wasn't burnt at all. But Matilda didn't care about the truth. She cared about control, about reminding Clara every single day that she didn't belong here, that she was an outsider who had somehow tricked her way into this family. I'm sorry, Clara whispered, hating how small her voice sounded, hating how easily the apology slipped out even though she had done nothing wrong. Matilda's smile widened. Of course you are, dear. You're always sorry, aren't you? She turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing there with her heart pounding and her hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. This was her life now. A constant barrage of small cruelties disguised as concern, insults wrapped in compliments, judgment hidden behind polite smiles. Every morning, Clara woke up hoping today would be different. Every night, she went to bed knowing it wouldn't be. The sisters-in-law, Rebecca and Louise, were just as bad. They treated Clara like a servant who had forgotten her place, like someone who needed constant reminding that she wasn't one of them and never would be. Clara, Could you be a dear and clean up after lunch? Rebecca would say, even though there were 3 housekeepers on staff. I'd do it myself, but I'm just so busy today. Louise would laugh, that sharp, cutting laugh that made Clara's stomach twist. You don't mind, do you? I mean, you're not doing anything important. And Clara would smile and nod and do what they asked because what else could she do? Fight back? She had tried that once, early on, when she thought standing up for herself might earn their respect. It had only made things worse. Adrian had been there that day. Clara had been folding laundry when Louise made a comment about how Clara's clothes looked cheap, how it was embarrassing that Adrian had married someone so plain. Clara, tired and worn down from weeks of this treatment, had finally snapped. I'm not plain, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. And there's nothing wrong with my clothes. You don't get to talk to me like that. For a moment, Louise looked genuinely surprised. Then her face twisted into something ugly, something mean. Excuse me, she said, her voice rising. Who do you think you're talking to? Before Clara could respond, Matilda appeared, and then Rebecca, and then Adrian, all of them drawn by the sound of raised voices. Louise didn't hesitate. She twisted the story, made it sound like Clara had attacked her for no reason, like Clara was unstable and cruel and completely out of control. She just started screaming at me, Louise said, her eyes wide and innocent. I was only trying to be nice, and she completely lost it. Clara turned to Adrian, waiting for him to defend her, to tell his family that wasn't what happened, that Clara had every right to stand up for herself. But Adrian looked at her with something that might have been disappointment or maybe just exhaustion. Clara, he said quietly, just apologize. Those 3 words broke something inside her. She stared at him, this man she loved, this man who was supposed to be on her side, and she realized he wasn't going to save her. He was never going to save her. She was alone. From that moment on, Clara stopped fighting. She learned to keep her head down, to move through the house like a shadow, to make herself as small and invisible as possible. But even that wasn't enough. Matilda seemed to have a radar for Clara's presence, always finding new ways to humiliate her, new wounds to inflict. Adrian tells me you've been feeling tired lately, Matilda said one afternoon, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Maybe you're not cut out for this life. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Somewhere simpler. Clara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She wouldn't let them see her break. I'm fine, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Matilda's eyes glittered with something that looked like victory. Of course you are, dear. Of course you are. The worst part wasn't the insults or the mockery or even the loneliness. The worst part was watching Adrian transform into someone she didn't recognize. The man who used to defend her, who used to tell her she was beautiful and strong and perfect just the way she was, had become his mother's puppet. He repeated Matilda's criticisms almost word for word, his voice cold and detached, as if Clara was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You need to try harder, he told her one night as they lay in bed, miles apart even though they were inches away from each other. My family isn't happy. You're making things difficult. Clara turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of the man she married. I'm not the one making things difficult, she said softly. They're cruel to me, Adrian. Every single day, they're cruel, and you just let them. He didn't even blink. You're being dramatic. They're just trying to help you fit in. If you weren't so sensitive, you'd see that. Clara felt something inside her chest crack open. She didn't say anything else. There was no point. The months blurred together, each one harder than the last. Clara stopped eating in the dining room because the tension was too much to bear. She stopped joining family gatherings because the whispered comments and pointed looks made her feel sick. She spent most of her time in her room, away from the judging eyes and the cutting words, away from Adrian's indifference and Matilda's poison. But even there, she wasn't safe. Even there, they found ways to remind her she didn't belong. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? Have you ever loved someone who stopped seeing you as human? Late at night, when the house was finally quiet and the cruelty had paused for a few hours, Clara would think about her grandmother, the only person who had ever truly loved her. The only person who had made her feel like she mattered. Her grandmother had been gone for years now, but Clara still heard her voice sometimes, soft and steady, reminding her that she was stronger than she knew. They can break your heart, but they can't break your spirit, her grandmother used to say. Not unless you let them. Clara clung to those words like a lifeline. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. A storm was coming, one that would strip away every illusion, every lie, every false smile. And when it was over, the family who had spent months trying to destroy her would realize they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The quiet woman they mocked, the soft-voiced bride they dismissed, was about to become the force that brought their entire world crashing down. The pregnancy test showed 2 lines. Then the ultrasound showed 3 heartbeats. Clara sat in the doctor's office, staring at the screen, watching 3 tiny forms moving inside her. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Triplets. 3 babies. 3 reasons to keep fighting. 3 reasons to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would change everything. Maybe when Adrian saw his children, he would remember who he used to be. Maybe when his family saw those babies, they would soften, would realize that Clara wasn't an enemy, but the mother of their grandchildren. She drove home with her hands shaking on the steering wheel, rehearsing how she would tell Adrian, imagining his face lighting up the way it used to, imagining him pulling her into his arms and whispering that everything would be okay. She was wrong about all of it. Adrian was in the living room when she got home, sitting beside his mother on the leather couch. Matilda was talking, her voice low and serious, and Adrian was nodding along like he always did now, like every word from her mouth was gospel. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against her stomach, gathering the courage to interrupt. "Adrian," she said softly. He looked up, and for a split second, she saw something in his eyes that looked like the man she married. Then Matilda turned to look at her, and that flicker of warmth disappeared. "What is it, Clara?" Matilda asked, her tone suggesting that whatever Clara had to say wasn't worth the interruption. Clara swallowed hard. "I need to talk to Adrian. Alone." Matilda's eyebrows lifted. "Anything you need to say to my son, you can say in front of me." Clara felt her courage draining away, but she forced herself to speak. "I'm pregnant. With triplets." The room went completely silent. Adrian's face went blank, like he couldn't process the words. Matilda's expression shifted from surprise to something darker, something cold and calculating. 3. Matilda said slowly, as if she were tasting the word and finding it bitter. 3 babies at once. Clara nodded, waiting for someone to say congratulations, waiting for Adrian to stand up and hug her, waiting for anything other than the heavy, suffocating silence that filled the room. Matilda stood up, smoothing her dress with deliberate precision. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "I suppose we'll have to deal with this." Deal with this. Not celebrate. Not rejoice. Deal with it. Like Clara's pregnancy was a problem, a burden, something inconvenient that needed to be managed. Adrian finally spoke, but his words offered no comfort. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice flat. Clara blinked back tears. "Yes, I'm sure. I just came from the doctor. There are 3 heartbeats, Adrian. 3 healthy babies." He rubbed his face with both hands, and when he looked at her again, there was no joy, no excitement, just exhaustion, and something that looked disturbingly like resentment. 3 kids, Clara. Do you have any idea how expensive that's going to be?" Matilda jumped in before Clara could respond. "Exactly. 3 children at once? The cost alone is astronomical. Diapers, formula, doctors, clothes, and that's just the beginning. This is a financial disaster." Clara's voice cracked when she spoke. "They're your grandchildren. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Matilda's smile was thin and sharp. "Of course it does, dear. But we have to be realistic. You've trapped my son. Whether you meant to or not, that's what you've done." The word trapped hit Clara like a slap. "I didn't trap anyone," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't plan this. It just happened." Rebecca, who had been listening from the hallway, chose that moment to walk in. 3 babies?" she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Oh, Clara, that's a lot." Are you sure you can handle that? I mean, you can barely handle yourself. Louise appeared right behind her, and the two of them exchanged a look that made Clara's stomach turn. She's right, Louise added. You're already so overwhelmed all the time. How are you going to take care of 3 infants? Clara looked at Adrian, silently begging him to say something, to defend her, to tell his family to stop. But he just sat there, staring at the floor, saying nothing. The months that followed were hell. Clara's body changed, her belly growing larger and heavier with each passing week, and every ounce of weight she gained seemed to add another layer of hostility from the family. Matilda watched her like a hawk, criticizing every meal she ate, every moment she rested, every choice she made. You're eating too much, Matilda would say, eyeing Clara's plate with disapproval. You're going to get fat, and then what? Adrian will be stuck with a wife who let herself go. When Clara tried to rest because her back was screaming in pain, Matilda would find her and say, pregnancy isn't an excuse to be lazy. My generation worked right up until delivery. You young women are so soft. Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Matilda that she wasn't lazy, that she was exhausted, that carrying 3 babies was nothing like carrying one, that her body was being stretched and strained in ways she couldn't have imagined. But she didn't say any of that. She just nodded and got up and did whatever Matilda demanded, because fighting back only made things worse. Adrian grew more distant with each passing day. He stopped asking how she felt. He stopped touching her. Some nights, he didn't even come to bed, choosing instead to sleep in the guest room because, as he put it, I need to get some rest, and you're always tossing and turning. Clara lay awake in the dark, her hands on her belly, feeling the babies move, and she wondered how she had ended up here. How had her marriage turned into this nightmare? How had the man who promised to love her forever become someone who couldn't even look at her? The loneliness was suffocating. She had no friends, no family nearby, no one to talk to. Her phone barely rang. The few friends she'd had before the marriage had drifted away, discouraged by Adrian's family, who made it clear that outsiders weren't welcome. Clara was completely, utterly alone. The worst part was the things they said when they thought she couldn't hear. One afternoon, Clara was resting in the upstairs hallway when she heard voices drifting up from the living room. Matilda's voice, sharp and venomous. She planned this, you know. Got herself pregnant on purpose to lock him down. 3 babies? Please. That's not an accident. That's a trap. Rebecca laughed. And now we're all stuck with her. Poor Adrian. He could have done so much better. Louise chimed in. She's going to bleed this family dry. You watch. She'll use those kids to squeeze every penny out of us. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. She wanted to run downstairs and scream at them, to tell them they were wrong, that she loved Adrian, that she never wanted any of this pain. But what was the point? They had already made up their minds. In their eyes, she was the villain, the gold digger, the parasite. And Adrian, who should have been defending her, was nowhere to be found. When the triplets were finally born, Clara thought things might change. She thought the moment Adrian held his children, something in him would shift, would soften, would bring back the man she fell in love with. But when the nurse placed the first baby in his arms, Adrian looked down at the tiny, fragile life he had helped create, and his face remained blank. No tears, no smile, just a quiet, uncomfortable silence. Matilda came to the hospital, but not to congratulate Clara. She came to inspect the babies like they were products on a shelf, checking to see if they met her standards. They're small, she said, frowning. Are you sure they're healthy? The doctor assured her they were fine, but Matilda didn't look convinced. 3 boys, she muttered. Well, at least they're not girls. Boys are easier. Clara, exhausted and emotionally shattered, didn't have the strength to respond. She just held her babies close, these 3 perfect little humans who didn't deserve to be born into a family that saw them as a burden. Have you ever felt like the people who were supposed to love you saw you as a problem instead? Have you ever been made to feel like your existence was an inconvenience? Clara had, and it was destroying her. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the heartbreak and the crushing weight of isolation, something was beginning to stir. A quiet, unshakable resolve. These babies were hers. They were innocent. They were perfect. And she would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant standing alone against an entire family that wanted her gone. The triplets were 2 weeks old when the snow started falling. Clara watched through the window as thick white flakes covered the ground. The trees, the driveway, everything turning cold and silent. She was holding one of the babies, rocking him gently while the other two slept in their bassinets. Her body ached. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But she didn't mind. These babies were everything to her. They were the only good thing left in her life. She heard voices downstairs, loud and angry, and her stomach tightened. Matilda was here. She could always tell when Matilda arrived because the entire house seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, the tension thickening until it was hard to breathe. Clara gently placed the baby back in his bassinet and walked to the top of the stairs, listening. She's a parasite, Adrian. Can't you see that? Matilda's voice cut through the house like a whip. 3 mouths to feed, 3 college funds, 3 weddings someday. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost you? She planned this. She got pregnant on purpose to trap you, and now you're stuck. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to go downstairs to defend herself, but her legs felt frozen. Adrian's voice came next, quieter but no less painful. I know, Mom. I know. I just don't know what to do. Matilda's response was immediate. You do what any smart man would do. You set boundaries. You make it clear that she can't just waltz in here and drain this family dry. If she wants to stay, she needs to prove she's worth keeping. Rebecca's voice joined in, sharp and cruel. Honestly, Adrian, I don't know why you're putting up with this. You could have married anyone. Anyone. And you chose her. Now look where you are. Stuck with 3 screaming babies and a wife who does nothing but complain. Louise laughed. She doesn't even take care of them properly. I walked past the nursery this morning and one of the babies was crying. Just crying. And she wasn't even there. That was a lie. Clara had been in the bathroom for 2 minutes and the baby had only just started fussing. But Louise didn't care about the truth. None of them did. Clara gripped the railing, her knuckles white, tears streaming down her face. She had done everything she could. She had sacrificed sleep, her body, her health, everything. And it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Adrian's footsteps echoed on the stairs, and Clara quickly wiped her face, trying to compose herself. He appeared at the top, his expression hard and cold. We need to talk, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Clara followed him into the bedroom, her heart pounding. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her, and she could see it in his eyes. Something had shifted. Something had broken. This isn't working, Clara, he said, his voice flat. What isn't working? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This. Us. The babies. All of it. Clara felt like the ground was falling out from under her. Adrian, what are you saying? He ran his hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. I'm saying that my family is right. You've turned our lives upside down. We can't afford this. I can't afford this. 3 kids at once? Do you have any idea how insane that is? Clara's voice shook. Adrian's footsteps echoed on the stairs, and Clara quickly wiped her face, trying to compose herself. He appeared at the top, his expression hard and cold. We need to talk, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Clara followed him into the bedroom, her heart pounding. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her, and she could see it in his eyes. Something had shifted. Something had broken. This isn't working, Clara, he said, his voice flat. What isn't working? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This. Us. The babies. All of it. Clara felt like the ground was falling out from under her. Adrian, what are you saying? He ran his hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. I'm saying that my family is right. You've turned our lives upside down. We can't afford this. I can't afford this. 3 kids at once? Do you have any idea how insane that is? Clara's voice shook. They're your children, Adrian. Our children. How can you talk about them like they're a mistake? His eyes flashed with anger. Because maybe they are. Did you ever think about that? Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we were a mistake. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Clara stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. This was the man she loved. The man she had trusted with her heart, her future, her life. And now he was looking at her like she was nothing. Like their babies were nothing. I want you to leave, he said quietly. Clara's breath caught. What? I want you out of this house. Tonight. Her legs nearly gave out. Adrian, it's snowing. It's freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go? He shrugged, and that small, careless gesture shattered what was left of her heart. That's not my problem. Figure it out. Before Clara could respond, the door opened, and Matilda walked in, followed by Rebecca and Louise. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They just entered, like they owned the room, like Clara had no right to privacy or dignity. Good, Matilda said, her voice cold and satisfied. You're finally doing the right thing, Adrian. Get her out of here. Clara looked from face to face, searching for even a hint of compassion, a shred of humanity. She found nothing. Please, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. Please don't do this. I have nowhere to go. The babies are so small. It's freezing out there. Matilda smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Clara had ever seen. You should have thought about that before you trapped my son. Rebecca stepped forward, her arms crossed. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you got here. This family doesn't want you. We never wanted you. Louise nodded. Take your babies and go. Find somewhere else to ruin. Clara turned to Adrian one last time, giving him a final chance to be the man she thought he was. Adrian, please. Don't do this. But Adrian's face was stone. Get out, Clara. The words were so cold, so final, that Clara knew there was no point in arguing. She walked to the nursery, moving like she was in a dream, like this couldn't possibly be real. She carefully wrapped each baby in a blanket, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the knots. The babies stirred, sensing something was wrong, their tiny faces scrunching up in confusion. Clara whispered to them, her voice cracking. It's okay. Mama's here. Mama's got you. She walked down the stairs, one baby in each arm, the third secured against her chest in a sling. The family stood at the bottom, watching her like she was a criminal being escorted out. Matilda opened the front door, and a blast of icy wind hit Clara so hard she almost stumbled. The snow was coming down in sheets now, thick and relentless. Out, Matilda said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Clara stepped onto the porch, and Adrian grabbed her arm, not gently, and shoved her forward. She stumbled down the steps, nearly losing her balance, clutching the babies tighter to keep them safe. Her feet hit the snow, and the cold shot through her like knives. She wasn't wearing a coat. She didn't have time to grab one. The babies were wrapped in blankets, but it wasn't enough. Not for this kind of cold. Clara turned back one last time, and she saw them standing in the doorway, all of them watching her. Matilda was smiling. Rebecca and Louise were whispering to each other, their faces lit with cruel satisfaction. And Adrian, the man she had loved with every part of herself, stood there with his arms crossed, his face empty, like she meant nothing to him, like she had never meant anything. Don't come back, Matilda called out, her voice carrying over the wind. You're not welcome here. You never were. The door slammed shut, and Clara stood there in the snow, shivering, her babies crying softly against her chest. Have you ever been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you? Have you ever felt so completely, utterly abandoned that you didn't know if you could survive? Clara started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to move, had to find shelter, had to protect her babies. The snow soaked through her clothes within minutes, the cold biting into her skin, making every step harder than the last. Her arms ached from holding the babies. Her legs felt like they were going to give out. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying, and she couldn't let that happen. Not when she had 3 lives depending on her. The street was empty. No cars. No lights. Just snow and darkness, and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Clara's mind drifted to the letter. The one she had received 2 days ago. The one she had read in disbelief, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. Her grandmother's lawyer had contacted her, informing her that she had inherited $500 million and majority ownership of a real estate trust. A trust that, according to the documents, Adrian's family had been quietly dependent on for years. Clara hadn't told anyone. She hadn't had time to process it, to understand what it meant. But now, standing in the freezing snow with her babies in her arms and nowhere to go, she understood perfectly. She had power. Real power. The kind of power that could destroy the people who had just destroyed her. And as she walked through the storm, her body shaking, her heart breaking, something inside her shifted. The fear and the sadness began to harden into something else. Something cold and sharp and unbreakable. They thought she was weak. They thought she was helpless. They thought they had won. But Clara wasn't finished. Not even close. And when she came back, when she finally returned to face them, they would realize that throwing her into the snow was the biggest mistake they ever made. Clara's body was shutting down. Every muscle screamed. Every breath felt like glass scraping through her lungs. The snow had soaked through her thin clothes, and the cold had worked its way so deep into her bones that she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. But she kept walking, one foot dragging in front of the other, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant leaving her babies alone in this frozen nightmare. The triplets were crying now, soft whimpering sounds that broke her heart into smaller and smaller pieces. They were cold. They were scared. And there was nothing she could do except hold them tighter and keep moving forward. Her mind drifted in and out of focus. She thought about Adrian's face when he shoved her out the door. She thought about Matilda's smile. She thought about how Rebecca and Louise had watched her stumble into the snow like it was entertainment. Like her suffering was something to enjoy. How does a human being do that to another human being? How does a mother-in-law look at a woman holding newborn babies and feel nothing but satisfaction? Clara didn't understand it. She didn't think she ever would. Her foot caught on something buried in the snow, and she fell hard, twisting her body at the last second to protect the babies. Pain shot through her shoulder and hip, but the babies were safe, still bundled against her chest. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the dark sky, snowflakes landing on her face and melting into tears. She didn't have the energy to cry. "Get up," a voice in her head commanded. "Get up, Clara. You don't get to give up. Not now. Not ever." She thought of her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, the woman who had taught her that strength wasn't always loud, that survival sometimes meant enduring things no one should have to endure. Her grandmother had been poor, had worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, had gone without food so Clara could eat. And she had never once complained. She had just done what needed to be done, day after day, with quiet dignity and unshakable resolve. Clara pushed herself up, her arms trembling under the weight of the babies. If her grandmother could survive, so could she. She had to. The street lights flickered in the distance, and Clara focused on them, using them as a marker, a goal. Just get to the light. Just make it that far. Then you can rest. Her thoughts turned darker as she walked. She realized with stunning clarity just how completely vulnerable she was. Physically vulnerable because her body was failing, because she had no coat, no car, no shelter, because every step was a fight against the cold that wanted to pull her down and swallow her whole. Emotionally vulnerable because the man she loved had betrayed her in the worst possible way, because the family she had tried so hard to please had thrown her away like garbage, because she was alone in a way that went beyond loneliness and became something existential, something crushing. And socially vulnerable because she had nothing. No money in her pocket. No phone because Adrian had taken it weeks ago, claiming she was spending too much time on it. No friends because they had all been slowly, systematically cut off by Adrian's family. No support system. No safety net. Nothing. Just her and 3 babies, and a world that didn't care if they lived or died. Have you ever felt so alone that you wondered if anyone would even notice if you disappeared? Have you ever been stripped of everything, left with nothing but the will to survive? Clara finally reached a gas station. The fluorescent lights were harsh and bright, and the warmth that hit her when she pushed through the door was so intense it made her dizzy. The man behind the counter looked up, and his eyes went wide. "Jesus," he muttered, coming around the counter. "Lady, are you okay? What happened?" Clara tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. I need help." The man guided her to a chair near the heater and grabbed a blanket from somewhere in the back. He wrapped it around her shoulders and looked at the babies, his face full of concern. "How long were you out there?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. An hour? Maybe more." The man shook his head, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance. You and those babies need to get checked out." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she couldn't afford an ambulance, that she had no insurance, that everything was too complicated to explain. But the words wouldn't come. She just sat there, holding her babies, feeling the warmth slowly creep back into her body. And for the first time since she walked out of that house, she let herself cry. Not quiet tears, not dignified sobs. She cried like a child, raw and broken, because she had nothing left to hold onto except the 3 tiny lives in her arms. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. They checked the babies first, and to Clara's overwhelming relief, they were okay. Cold, but okay. Then they checked Clara, and the concern on their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Your body temperature is dangerously low," one of them said. "We need to get you to the hospital." Clara shook her head. "I can't. I don't have money. I don't have insurance. I can't afford this." The paramedic, a woman with kind eyes, knelt down in front of her. "Ma'am, you almost died tonight. You and your babies almost died. Money doesn't matter right now. Your life matters. Let us help you." Clara didn't have the strength to argue. She let them load her and the babies into the ambulance, let them wrap her in heated blankets, let them start in 4 to warm her from the inside out. As the ambulance pulled away from the gas station, Clara looked out the window at the falling snow, and she thought about the letter, the inheritance, the $500 million that she hadn't told anyone about, the real estate trust that Adrian's family depended on without even knowing she controlled it. They thought they had destroyed her. They thought they had taken everything from her. But they were wrong. They had no idea what they had done. They had no idea who they were dealing with. At the hospital, Clara was admitted for observation. The babies were placed in warmers, monitored closely, but they were strong. Stronger than anyone expected. The nurses kept asking Clara questions. Where was the father? Where was her family? Why was she out in a snowstorm with 3 newborns? Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Not until she figured out what came next. A social worker came by, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a tired smile. "Ms. Clara," she said gently, "I need to ask you some hard questions. Are you in a safe situation? Is someone hurting you?" Clara looked at her, really looked at her, and she realized this was the first person in months who had asked if she was okay. The first person who seemed to actually care. "My husband kicked me out," Clara said, her voice hollow. "His family hated me. They told him I was a burden. So he threw me and the babies into the snow and locked the door." The social worker's expression darkened. "That's abuse. You know that, right? What he did to you is abuse." Clara nodded slowly. She did know. But hearing someone else say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Do you have anywhere to go?" the social worker asked. Clara thought about the letter again. About the lawyer who had contacted her. About the $500 million sitting in an account with her name on it. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "I think I do." The next morning, Clara was discharged with the babies. She called the lawyer from the hospital phone, and within 2 hours, he arrived with a car, a security team, and a plan. His name was Richard Lawson, and he was the kind of lawyer who wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked at Clara, bruised and exhausted, holding 3 tiny babies, and his expression shifted from professional to protective. "Ms. Clara," he said, his voice firm but kind, "your grandmother left you more than money. She left you power, and I'm going to make sure you use it." Clara looked at him, and for the first time since the snowstorm, she felt something other than fear and heartbreak. She felt anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculated kind. The kind that didn't make noise. The kind that dismantled lives piece by piece. Tell me what I need to do, Clara said. Richard smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew how to win. First, we secure your assets. Second, we make sure your husband and his family can't touch a single dollar. Third, we prepare for the legal battle they're going to start the moment they realize what you have. And fourth, he paused, his eyes sharp, we make them regret every single thing they did to you. Clara nodded. She held her babies closer, feeling their warmth, their weight, their need for her. They had tried to break her. They had tried to erase her. But Clara wasn't broken. She wasn't erased. She was still here. And now, she had the one thing they never thought she would have. She had power. Real, unstoppable, life-changing power. And she was going to use every bit of it to make sure they never hurt anyone again. The storm had stripped everything away. But underneath all that pain and fear and humiliation, Clara had discovered something they didn't know existed. She had discovered herself. And that was the most dangerous thing they could have ever unleashed. Clara sat in the hotel suite Richard had arranged for her, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The babies were asleep in their cribs, finally warm and safe, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. She should have felt relief. She should have felt grateful. But all she felt was a cold, burning clarity that seemed to sharpen with every passing minute. The last 48 hours had stripped away every illusion she had about her marriage, about Adrian's family, about who she was, and what she was capable of enduring. And now, sitting in this quiet room with her sleeping children, Clara realized something that would change everything. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to fight. And she was going to win. Richard knocked softly on the door before entering, carrying a leather folder thick with documents. He sat down across from her, his expression serious. "I've reviewed everything," he said, laying the folder on the coffee table between them. "Your grandmother was an incredibly smart woman. She didn't just leave you money, Clara. She left you in control. Total, absolute control over the Whitmore Real Estate Trust." Clara blinked. "The Whitmore Trust? I've heard Adrian mention that. His family talks about it like it's theirs." Richard's smile was grim. "That's because they've been operating under the assumption that it is theirs. But legally, it never was. Your grandmother owned 65% of the trust. She was the silent majority shareholder. And when she passed, that controlling stake went to you." Clara's mind raced. "What does that mean exactly?" Richard leaned forward. "It means that every property they think they own, every income stream they think they control, every investment they've made under the trust name, all of it is subject to your approval. Without your signature, they can't access funds. Without your consent, they can't make decisions. Without you, Clara, they have nothing." The weight of those words settled over her like a blanket. For months, she had felt powerless, invisible, like she didn't matter. And all along, she had held the keys to the kingdom. "Why didn't my grandmother tell me?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's expression softened. "She tried. She sent you letters, but I suspect they were intercepted. Your grandmother knew your marriage was troubled. She knew Adrian's family was dangerous. That's why she made sure everything was ironclad. She wanted you to be protected, even if she wasn't around to do it herself." Tears stung Clara's eyes. Her grandmother had always been her protector, the one person who saw her, who valued her, who loved her without condition. And even in death, she was still protecting her. "What do I do now?" Clara asked. Richard pulled out a document and slid it across the table. "First, we freeze all trust accounts. As of this moment, Adrian's family has no access to any funds. Second, we file for full custody of your children. Third, we prepare for the legal battle that's coming, because the moment they realize what's happened, they're going to come after you with everything they have." Clara looked at the document, her hand hovering over it. This was it. The moment that would define everything that came next. If she signed, there was no going back. If she signed, she was declaring war. "They'll say I'm unstable," Clara said quietly. They'll say I abandoned my children. They'll twist everything to make me look like the villain. Richard nodded. They will. But we have something they don't. We have the truth. We have evidence of their abuse, their manipulation, their cruelty. We have hospital records from the night they threw you into the snow. We have witness statements from the gas station attendant and the paramedics. And most importantly, we have your strength. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. That matters, Clara. That matters more than you know. Clara picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed her name at the bottom of the document, and with that single stroke, everything changed. The next morning, Adrian's phone rang at 6 a.m. He groaned, reaching for it without opening his eyes, assuming it was a work call. Instead, it was his accountant, and the man sounded panicked. Adrian, we have a problem. A big problem. Adrian sat up, suddenly awake. What kind of problem? All the trust accounts are frozen. Every single one. I tried to access funds this morning for the quarterly distributions, and I got an error message saying the accounts are under review by the primary shareholder. Adrian's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? My mother is the primary shareholder. The accountant's voice was shaking. No, she's not. According to the legal documents I just received, the primary shareholder is someone named Clara Whitmore. Do you know who that is? Adrian's mouth went dry. Clara, his wife. The woman he had thrown into the snow 3 days ago. That's impossible, he said, his voice barely audible. It's not impossible. It's fact. And until she signs off on the accounts, we're locked out. Completely locked out. Adrian hung up and sat there, staring at the wall, his mind spinning. How? How did Clara have control over the trust? She was nobody. She had nothing. She was just a soft-spoken woman from a poor background who had somehow tricked him into marriage. Except she wasn't. And he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Downstairs, Matilda was having breakfast when Adrian burst into the room, his face pale and wild. We need to talk. Now. Matilda set down her tea, her expression annoyed. What's gotten into you? Clara owns the trust. She owns it, Mom. All of it. Matilda froze. What are you talking about? Adrian's voice rose. The Whitmore Trust. The one we've been living off for the last 20 years. The one that funds this house, our cars, our lifestyle. Clara's grandmother owned 65% of it, and when she died, she left it all to Clara. We have no access. We have nothing. The room went silent. Rebecca, who had been scrolling through her phone at the table, looked up in shock. Louise, who had just walked in, stopped in her tracks. Matilda's face turned a shade of red that Adrian had never seen before. That little witch, Matilda hissed. She knew. She knew the whole time, and she didn't say anything. She was planning this. She was always planning this. Adrian shook his head. I don't think she knew. I think she just found out. Matilda stood up, her hands trembling with rage. Then we get it back. We go to court. We prove she's unfit. We take those babies and we take that money, and we make sure she never has power over this family again. Adrian felt a chill run down his spine. His mother's eyes were cold and calculating, and he realized in that moment that she didn't care about Clara, didn't care about the babies, didn't care about anything except control and money. Have you ever seen someone's true nature and wished you hadn't? Have you ever realized too late that you've been on the wrong side all along? Back in the hotel suite, Clara was nursing one of the babies when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. Hello. Clara. It was Adrian. His voice sounded strained, desperate. We need to talk. Clara's grip tightened on the phone. There's nothing to talk about, Adrian. You made your choice. I made a mistake. I know that now. Please, just let me explain. Clara closed her eyes, and for a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You threw me into the snow, Adrian. You looked me in the eye, with our babies in my arms, and you told me to leave. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you have to live with it. Adrian's voice cracked. Please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't take everything away from us. Clara's voice was calm, steady, and colder than the snow she had walked through 3 nights ago. I'm not taking anything away from you, Adrian. I'm just taking back what was always mine. You and your family tried to destroy me. You tried to erase me. But I'm still here. And now you're going to see exactly what happens when you underestimate someone. She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From power. From the knowledge that she was no longer the woman they had mocked and humiliated. She was someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone dangerous. Richard walked in, holding another folder. They're going to file for custody. Probably within the next 72 hours. Are you ready? Clara looked at her babies, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that was about to break. She thought of her grandmother, of the lessons she had learned, of the strength that had been passed down through generations. Yes, Clara said, her voice firm. I'm ready. And for the first time since she walked out of that house, Clara smiled. Not a sad smile. Not a broken smile. A smile that promised justice, retribution, and the kind of reckoning that would leave no one untouched. Adrian stood in the middle of his mother's living room, pacing like a caged animal. His phone had been ringing nonstop for the past hour. Lawyers, accountants, business partners, everyone demanding to know what was happening with the trust accounts. He had no answers. Worse, he had no control. And for the first time in his life, Adrian felt the ground shifting beneath him, felt the walls closing in, felt the suffocating weight of consequences he never saw coming. Matilda sat on the couch, her face a mask of fury barely contained beneath a veneer of cold calculation. Rebecca and Louise hovered nearby, their usual smugness replaced with something closer to panic. The family that had spent months tearing Clara apart was now watching their entire world crumble, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Except they didn't see it that way. They never would. This is her fault, Matilda said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. That manipulative little snake planned this from the beginning. She wormed her way into this family, got herself pregnant, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Adrian stopped pacing and looked at his mother. She didn't know about the inheritance, Mom. She couldn't have. The letter only came a few days before He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Before I threw her into the snow. Before I destroyed everything. Matilda's eyes narrowed. Don't be naive, Adrian. Women like her always have a plan. She played the victim perfectly, didn't she? Made herself look weak and helpless, so we'd let our guard down. And now look where we are. Locked out of our own money, humiliated, powerless. Rebecca nodded eagerly. She probably knew the whole time. That's why she never fought back. She was waiting, letting us think we'd won so she could pull the rug out from under us. Louise chimed in, her voice high and venomous. We should sue her. We should tell everyone she's mentally unstable. We should get those babies taken away from her and placed with us where they belong. Adrian felt something twist in his gut. A small, uncomfortable voice in the back of his mind whispered that this was wrong, that they were wrong, that maybe, just maybe, Clara had been telling the truth all along. But he pushed that voice down. It was easier to believe his family. Easier to believe that Clara was the villain and they were the victims. Easier than admitting he had destroyed his marriage and betrayed the woman he once loved for no reason other than blind loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. Matilda stood up, smoothing her designer dress with hands that trembled slightly. We're going to fix this. We're going to go to court, and we're going to prove that Clara is an unfit mother. We'll say she abandoned her children. We'll say she's emotionally unstable and incapable of caring for 3 infants. We'll get custody, and once we have those babies, we'll have leverage. She'll hand over the trust to get them back. Adrian's stomach turned. You want to use the babies as leverage? Matilda looked at him like he was stupid. Of course. It's the only card we have left to play. Do you have a better idea? Adrian didn't. That was the problem. He had no ideas, no solutions, no plan. He had spent his entire life letting his mother make decisions for him. And now that strategy had led them into a disaster he couldn't see a way out of. What if she doesn't give in? Adrian asked quietly. What if she fights us in court and wins? Matilda's smile was cold and certain. She won't win. She's nobody, Adrian. She has no connections, no power, no resources. We have the best lawyers money can buy. We have reputation, standing, and influence. The court will see her for what she is, a gold digger who trapped you into marriage and is now trying to steal what rightfully belongs to this family. But even as Matilda spoke, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that they were underestimating Clara. She had survived being thrown into a snowstorm with 3 newborns. She had found a way to not only survive, but come out on the other side with control over their entire financial future. That didn't sound like someone who was weak or helpless. That sounded like someone who was far more dangerous than any of them had realized. The next day, Matilda called a family lawyer, Gregory Mills, a man known for his ruthlessness in custody battles. He arrived at the house within hours, his expression all business, as he sat down at the dining table and listened to their story. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Gregory said slowly. "You threw your wife and 3 newborn infants out of a house during a snowstorm. She nearly died. The babies nearly died. And now you want to sue her for custody, claiming she's an unfit mother." Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "When you say it like that, it sounds bad." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "That's because it is bad, Adrian. Any judge who hears this case is going to ask the same question I'm asking right now. Why would a mother who was willing to walk through a blizzard to protect her children be considered unfit?" Matilda leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Because she abandoned them. She left this house and didn't come back for 3 days. That's abandonment, isn't it?" Gregory sighed. "She didn't abandon them. She was forced out. There's a significant legal difference. And if she has hospital records, witness statements, or any documentation proving what happened that night, your case falls apart before it even begins." Rebecca's face flushed. "So what are you saying? That we can't win?" Gregory folded his hands on the table. "I'm saying that winning a custody battle against a mother who has done nothing wrong is nearly impossible. However, if you're willing to get creative, we might be able to build a case based on her current living situation, her lack of stable income, her inability to provide for 3 children on her own." Matilda's eyes lit up. "Exactly. She has nothing. No job, no support system, no home. How is she going to take care of 3 babies?" Gregory nodded slowly. "That's the angle we'd have to take. But understand this, it's a long shot. And if she has competent legal representation, they'll dismantle that argument in a heartbeat." Adrian felt a headache building behind his eyes. "Just do whatever it takes. File the papers. We'll deal with the rest as it comes." While Adrian and his family plotted their next move, they had no idea what Clara was doing. They assumed she was hiding, scared, scrambling to figure out how to survive. They were wrong. Clara was in a conference room with Richard and 2 other attorneys, reviewing every piece of evidence they had collected. Hospital records documenting her near hypothermia and the baby's condition. Witness statements from the gas station attendant who found her. Paramedic reports describing the severity of the situation. Security footage from the hospital showing her arrival. Phone records proving Adrian had cut off her access to communication. Bank statements showing he had drained their joint account without her knowledge. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty was documented, time-stamped, and ready to be presented in court. "They're going to argue that you're unstable," Richard said, looking up from the documents. "They'll claim you're emotionally fragile, incapable of caring for the children, and that the babies would be better off with them." Clara's voice was calm. "Let them try. I have 3 children who are healthy, happy, and thriving under my care. I have financial resources they can't touch. I have evidence of their abuse. What do they have?" Richard smiled. "Desperation. And desperation makes people sloppy." One of the other attorneys, a sharp woman named Elena, leaned forward. "There's something else you should know. We did some digging into Matilda's background. She's been involved in several legal disputes over the years, including accusations of financial misconduct and manipulation. None of it stuck, but it paints a picture. If they try to claim moral high ground, we can shred that argument in seconds." Clara felt a surge of satisfaction. For months, she had been the one under scrutiny, the one being judged and criticized and torn apart. Now, the tables were turning. Now they would be the ones exposed, examined, held accountable. Have you ever watched someone who hurt you finally face the consequences of their actions? Have you ever felt that moment when justice stops being an idea and becomes reality? Back at Adrian's house, the tension was unbearable. Matilda had taken to snapping at everyone, her usual composure cracking under the weight of their financial crisis. Rebecca and Louise walked on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing and set her off. Adrian avoided everyone, spending hours locked in his study, staring at his computer screen and trying to figure out how his life had fallen apart so quickly. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt his blood run cold. It was a legal notice. Clara was filing for full custody of the triplets and a restraining order preventing any member of Adrian's family from contacting her or the children. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Adrian's hands shook as he read the document. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time, he realized that Clara wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to disappear. She wasn't going to let them win. He walked downstairs and found his mother in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine even though it was barely noon. She filed, Adrian said, his voice hollow. She's taking us to court. Matilda's hand tightened around the wine glass. Good. Let her. We'll bury her. But Adrian didn't feel confident. He felt terrified. Because somewhere deep down, beneath all the lies he had told himself, beneath all the justifications and excuses, he knew the truth. They had destroyed an innocent woman. They had tried to break her. And now she was coming for them with the full force of the law behind her. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. Clara sat at the desk in her hotel suite, the letter spread out in front of her like a map to a future she never imagined possible. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that whispered wealth and permanence. Her grandmother's lawyer had delivered it personally 2 days before Adrian threw her into the snow, but Clara hadn't had time to process what it meant. She had been too consumed with the babies, too exhausted from sleepless nights, too beaten down by months of cruelty to understand the magnitude of what she was holding. Now, with distance and clarity, she read it again, and each time, the words hit her with the force of lightning. To my beloved granddaughter, Clara, I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to $500 million in liquid assets, stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and 65% controlling interest in the Whitmore Real Estate Trust. Clara's hands trembled as she traced the words with her finger. $500 million. $500 million. It was an amount so large she couldn't fully comprehend it. She had grown up poor, wearing second-hand clothes, eating meals her grandmother stretched to last 3 days. And now she was wealthier than everyone who had ever looked down on her combined. But it wasn't just the money. It was the trust. The Whitmore Real Estate Trust that Adrian's family had built their entire lifestyle around. The trust they believed they controlled, that funded their mansion, their cars, their country club memberships, their sense of superiority. Her grandmother had owned the majority stake all along, quietly, invisibly, watching from the shadows. And now Clara owned it. Every decision they made, every property they developed, every investment they pursued, required her approval. Without her signature, they were nothing. Without her consent, they had no access to the funds that kept their world spinning. The irony was almost poetic. They had thrown her out like garbage, believing she was powerless and poor. They had no idea they were standing on the ground she owned. Richard walked into the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and set one down in front of her. "You're reading it again," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Clara looked up, her eyes sharp. "I keep thinking about my grandmother, about how she must have known what Adrian's family was like. She must have seen through them from the very beginning." Richard nodded. "Your grandmother was an incredibly perceptive woman. I worked with her for over 20 years, and she never made a decision without fully understanding the consequences. She knew exactly what kind of people they were. That's why she structured everything the way she did. She wanted to protect you." Clara's throat tightened. She sent me letters, didn't she? You mentioned that before. Richard's expression darkened. She did. 3 of them over the last year. But I suspect they never reached you. Your husband or his family likely intercepted them. Clara felt anger surge through her veins. Of course they had. They had controlled everything. Her phone, her mail, her access to the outside world. They had isolated her so completely that even her own grandmother's attempts to reach her had been blocked. What did the letters say? Clara asked quietly. Richard hesitated, then pulled a file from his briefcase. Your grandmother kept copies. She suspected they might not get through, so she documented everything. Would you like to read them? Clara took the file with shaking hands and opened it. The first letter was dated 8 months ago, written in her grandmother's careful, elegant handwriting. My dearest Clara, I have tried to call, but your phone seems to be disconnected. I worry about you constantly. I know your marriage has been difficult, and I want you to know that you are not alone. I have made arrangements to ensure that you will always be taken care of, no matter what happens. You are stronger than you know, my darling girl. Never forget that. All my love, Grandma. Clara's vision blurred with tears. Her grandmother had known. She had known Clara was suffering, had known she needed help, and had tried to reach her. The second letter was shorter, more urgent. Clara, I am very ill, and the doctors say I don't have much time. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. But I want you to know that I have left you everything. Not because of the money, but because I trust you to use it wisely. You have a good heart, Clara. Don't let anyone take that from you. Be strong. Be fierce. Be everything they said you couldn't be. The third letter was dated just 3 weeks before her grandmother passed away. My sweet Clara, if Adrian or his family ever try to hurt you, remember this. You have power. More power than they could ever imagine. Use it. Protect yourself. Protect your future. And know that I loved you more than life itself. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Clara closed the file and pressed her hands to her face, letting the tears come. Her grandmother had fought for her even from her deathbed, had given her the tools to survive, to fight back, to reclaim her life. And Clara wasn't going to let that gift go to waste. Richard gave her a moment, then spoke gently. Your grandmother was brilliant, Clara. She didn't just leave you money. She left you leverage. She knew exactly what she was doing when she structured the trust the way she did. She wanted you to have control, not just wealth. She wanted you to have the ability to fight back. Clara wiped her eyes and straightened in her chair. Tell me everything. I need to know exactly what I control and how to use it. Richard pulled out a thick binder and opened it to the first page. The Whitmore Real Estate Trust owns 42 commercial properties across 6 states. Office buildings, shopping centers, apartment complexes. The total value is approximately $2.3 billion. Your 65% stake gives you controlling interest, which means you make all final decisions regarding sales, leases, developments, and distributions. Clara's mind raced. Adrian's family has been living off the trust's income. Richard nodded. For the last 18 years. They receive quarterly distributions that have been funding their lifestyle. Your mother-in-law, Matilda, has been acting as the trust's administrator, but legally, she has no authority without the primary shareholders' approval. She's been operating under the assumption that she had free rein because your grandmother rarely interfered. But now that you're the primary shareholder, every decision she's made is subject to your review and approval. Clara leaned forward. What happens if I revoke that approval? Richard's smile was slow and deliberate. Then the distributions stop. The accounts freeze. And they have no legal recourse because the trust was never theirs to begin with. Your grandmother simply allowed them access as a courtesy. A courtesy you are under no obligation to extend. Clara felt something click into place. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about taking back the power they had stolen from her and using it to ensure they could never hurt anyone again. I want to revoke their access, Clara said, her voice steady. All of it. Immediately. Richard nodded. Consider it done. I'll file the paperwork this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, every account will be frozen, and they'll receive formal notification that their access has been terminated. Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Adrian and his family were plotting, scheming, trying to figure out how to destroy her. But they had no idea what was coming. They thought she was weak. They thought she was broken. They thought throwing her into the snow was the end of her story. They were about to learn that it was only the beginning. "What about the custody case?" Clara asked, turning back to Richard. "They're going to argue that I'm unstable, that I can't provide for the children, that I'm a danger to them. How do we counter that?" Richard's expression was calm and confident. "We present the truth. We show the court exactly what happened the night they threw you out. We present medical records, witness statements, and evidence of their abuse. We demonstrate that you are a loving, capable mother who has done everything in her power to protect your children. And then we show them your financial situation. A woman with $500 million and complete financial stability is not someone the court will consider unfit." Clara nodded slowly. "And what about them? What happens when the court sees what they did?" Richard's smile turned cold. "They'll be lucky if they don't face criminal charges. What they did to you and those babies constitutes child endangerment at minimum. If the prosecutor decides to pursue it, they could be looking at jail time." The thought should have brought Clara satisfaction, but instead, she felt a strange emptiness. She didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. She wanted justice. She wanted accountability. She wanted to make sure that no one else would ever be treated the way she had been treated. "I want to win," Clara said quietly. "Not just in court. I want to win in every way that matters. I want my children safe. I want my life back. I want them to understand that they can't destroy people without consequences." Richard stood and extended his hand. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do. Are you ready for this, Clara? Because once we start, there's no going back. This is going to get ugly. They're going to attack you, smear you, try to break you down. Can you handle that?" Clara thought about the snowstorm, about the moment she stood in the freezing cold with her babies in her arms, alone and abandoned, with nothing but her will to survive. She thought about her grandmother's letters, about the strength that had been passed down through generations, about the woman she had become in the aftermath of unimaginable cruelty. She looked Richard in the eye and shook his hand firmly. "I can handle anything they throw at me, because I've already survived the worst thing they could do. And I'm still standing." Richard smiled. "Then let's go to war." And with those words, Clara stepped fully into the woman she was always meant to be. Not a victim, not a broken shell of her former self, but a force of nature, armed with truth, justice, and the kind of power that couldn't be bought or stolen. The family that had tried to erase her was about to discover that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. And there would be no mercy, only justice. Cold, calculated, and absolute. 6 weeks. That's how long it took for Clara to transform from the broken woman who stumbled through the snow into someone completely unrecognizable. Not just physically, though that change was striking. Her face had filled out, the hollow exhaustion replaced with calm authority. Her hair, once limp and neglected, now fell in glossy waves around her shoulders. Her clothes were tailored, elegant, the kind that whispered power without shouting it. But the real transformation was deeper, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. It was in her eyes, sharp and calculating. It was in the way she held herself, spine straight, shoulders back, every movement deliberate. It was in her voice, no longer soft and apologetic, but firm and commanding. Clara had shed the skin of the woman they tried to destroy and emerged as something they never anticipated. A strategist. A warrior. A woman who knew exactly what she was capable of and wasn't afraid to use it. Richard sat across from her in the penthouse suite she had purchased 3 weeks earlier, reviewing the final documents for the custody hearing scheduled for tomorrow. "Everything is in place," he said, closing the folder with a satisfied nod. "We have testimony from the gas station attendant, the paramedics, the hospital staff. We have financial records proving Adrian drained your joint account. We have documentation of every frozen trust account and every failed attempt by his family to access funds. And most importantly, we have you." Clara looked up from where she was feeding one of the triplets, her expression calm. "What about their case? What are they planning to argue?" Richard's smile was thin. "Desperation. They're claiming you're emotionally unstable, that you abandoned the children, that you're using inheritance to manipulate the situation. Their lawyer, Gregory Mills, filed a petition to have your grandmother's will overturned, claiming you coerced her while she was on her deathbed." Clara's hand paused mid-motion, the bottle hovering near the baby's mouth. "They're saying I manipulated my dying grandmother." Richard nodded. "It's a common tactic when someone stands to inherit a significant amount. They're hoping to cast doubt on your character, make you look like a conniving gold digger. But here's the problem with their strategy. Your grandmother's will was written 4 years ago, long before you even met Adrian. It's been updated multiple times, but the core structure has always named you as the primary beneficiary. There's a paper trail that proves she made these decisions of sound mind and with clear intent. Their argument falls apart the moment we present that evidence." Clara set the bottle down and carefully burped the baby, her mind working through the variables. "What about the custody claim? What's their best angle?" Richard leaned back in his chair. "They're going to argue that the babies need stability, that you've been moving around, that you don't have a permanent home or support system. They'll try to paint a picture of you as a struggling single mother who can't provide the kind of life these children deserve." Clara's laugh was soft but cold. "And we counter with what? That I'm worth $500 million and own 42 commercial properties." Richard shook his head. "We don't lead with money. Money doesn't make someone a good parent, and any judge worth their salt knows that. We lead with love. We show them the medical records proving you risked your life to protect these babies. We show them the nights you spent in the hospital, refusing to leave their side even when doctors told you to rest. We show them that you have given these children everything, while Adrian and his family have given them nothing but rejection and cruelty. And then once we've established that you are the better parent, we present your financial stability as proof that you can provide for them in every possible way." Clara nodded slowly, her hand gently stroking the baby's back. "They're going to attack me personally. I know they will." Richard's expression softened. "They are. They'll say terrible things. They'll twist every moment of kindness into manipulation, every act of survival into selfishness. But Clara, here's what they don't understand. The judge isn't going to care about their accusations. The judge is going to care about facts. And the facts are on your side." While Clara prepared for battle, Adrian's world was collapsing in slow motion. The morning after the trust accounts were frozen, his credit cards started declining. By the end of the week, his luxury car had been repossessed because the lease payments, which were automatically withdrawn from the trust account, had bounced. The country club membership his family had held for 20 years was revoked due to non-payment. The housekeeper and gardener quit when their paychecks didn't clear. And every single day brought a new humiliation, a new reminder that the life they had taken for granted was built on foundations they never owned. Matilda was in denial, convinced that this was temporary, that they would find a way to overturn Clara's control and restore everything to the way it was. But Adrian was beginning to see the truth. They had lost, not just financially, but morally. They had destroyed an innocent woman, and now they were paying the price. Have you ever watched someone you love refuse to accept reality, even as it crumbles around them? Have you ever realized too late that you've been complicit in something unforgivable? Adrian sat in his study, staring at the stack of bills he couldn't pay. His phone rang, and he saw his mother's name flash on the screen. He didn't want to answer, but avoiding her had become impossible. "Adrian, we need to talk," Matilda said, her voice tight. "The hearing is tomorrow. Are you prepared?" Adrian rubbed his face with both hands. "Prepared for what, Mom? To lose? Because that's what's going to happen. We have no case. Clara didn't do anything wrong, and we did everything wrong." Matilda's voice rose. "Stop being weak. We are not losing. We are going to that courthouse, and we're going to prove that Clara is an unfit mother. We're going to take those babies, and we're going to force her to hand over the trust to get them back. Adrian felt something inside him snap. Do you even hear yourself? You want to use my children as hostages. You want to blackmail their mother into giving up money that was never ours to begin with. What is wrong with you? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Matilda spoke again, her voice was ice. If you're not with this family, Adrian, then you're against us. And if you're against us, you're on your own. The line went dead. Adrian sat there, phone in hand, and realized he had just been disowned by his own mother. And the strangest part was, he felt relieved. The night before the hearing, Clara stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. She wore a navy blue suit, simple but powerful, the kind that commanded respect without demanding attention. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her makeup minimal but flawless. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, someone who made decisions that affected thousands of lives. She looked like someone who couldn't be broken. Richard knocked on the door and stepped inside. It's time, he said quietly. Clara turned to face him. Are we ready? Richard nodded. We're more than ready. But I need to ask you something, Clara. Tomorrow, when you walk into that courtroom, they're going to see you. Not the woman they threw away, but the woman you've become. And it's going to terrify them. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to watch them realize what they've lost? Clara thought about the question. She thought about the months of cruelty, the lies, the manipulation, the night they threw her into the snow with her babies in her arms. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who apologized for existing, who made herself small to avoid conflict. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that mercy was a gift, not a weakness, and that justice didn't require cruelty. It simply required truth. I'm not doing this for revenge, Clara said quietly. I'm doing this because my children deserve a mother who fights for them. They deserve to grow up knowing that strength isn't about hurting others. It's about protecting the people you love and holding the line when everyone else tells you to back down. Richard smiled. Then you're going to win. Not just tomorrow, but in every way that matters. Clara picked up her purse and walked toward the door. She paused, looking back at the room where she had spent the last 6 weeks rebuilding herself from the ground up. My grandmother used to tell me that storms don't last forever, Clara said softly. She said that if you can survive the worst of it, if you can keep your head up when the wind is trying to knock you down, eventually the sky clears. And when it does, you'll see everything with new eyes. Richard nodded. Your grandmother was right. Clara's expression hardened with resolve. Tomorrow the storm ends. And they're going to see exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. She fed the babies, dressed them in soft white outfits that made them look like angels, and prepared herself for the battle ahead. When the car arrived to take her to the courthouse, she didn't look back. She didn't second guess. She simply moved forward, each step carrying her closer to the moment that would define the rest of her life. Adrian's family had spent 6 weeks spiraling into panic and desperation. Clara had spent those same 6 weeks becoming unstoppable. And as the sun rose over the city, casting golden light across the courthouse steps, Clara walked toward her future with her head held high and her children safe in her arms. The family that tried to destroy her was about to learn the most important lesson of their lives. You don't throw a woman into the snow and expect her to stay down. Sometimes she comes back stronger. And when she does, there's nothing you can do but watch as everything you built comes crashing down around you. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Clara's penthouse. It was cream-colored, expensive, with gold lettering embossed across the front. Clara stared at it for a long moment before opening it, her instincts telling her that whatever was inside wasn't going to be good. She was right. Inside was a wedding invitation. Adrian was getting remarried to a woman named Veronica Ashford, someone Clara had never heard of, but whose name dripped with old money and social standing. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks from now, at the family's estate, the same house where Clara had been tormented for months, the same house where she had been thrown into the snow. The invitation was addressed to Clara personally, and at the bottom, in Matilda's unmistakable handwriting, was a note. "We thought you should know that Adrian is moving on with his life. Perhaps it's time you did the same. The children are welcome to attend. They deserve to see their father happy." Clara read the note 3 times, each word dripping with venom disguised as civility. This wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. A carefully orchestrated performance designed to humiliate her, to remind her that she was replaceable, that Adrian had found someone better. They wanted her to show up broken and defeated so they could parade their victory in front of her. They wanted to see her cry, to see her beg, to see her finally completely destroyed. Richard walked into the room and saw the invitation on the table. He picked it up, read it, and his jaw tightened. "They're baiting you," he said flatly. "They want you to react. They want you to show up emotionally and out of control so they can use it against you in court." Clara's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I know." Richard looked at her carefully. "So, what are you going to do?" Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. For a moment, she said nothing, her mind working through the angles, the possibilities, the ways this could play out. Then she turned back to Richard, and her smile was sharp and cold. "I'm going to accept the invitation. I'm going to that wedding. And I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve." Richard's eyebrows lifted. "Clara, that's risky. If you go there and things get heated, if you lose control even for a second, they'll twist it. They'll use it to paint you as unstable." Clara shook her head. "I'm not going to lose control. I'm going to walk in there with my head held high, with my children in my arms, and I'm going to let them see exactly what they threw away. And when they realize what they've lost, when they see that I'm not broken, that I'm stronger than I've ever been, that's when they'll understand. They didn't destroy me. They created me." The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Clara didn't just plan her appearance at the wedding. She orchestrated it. Every detail mattered. Every moment was calculated. She hired a stylist who dressed her in a gown that was elegant but not ostentatious, powerful but not aggressive. Midnight blue silk that caught the light and made her look like she had stepped out of a dream. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup perfect but understated. She looked like royalty. She looked untouchable. Richard had arranged for a security team to accompany her, not for protection, but for presence. 2 well-dressed men who radiated authority, who made it clear that Clara wasn't someone who could be intimidated or pushed around. The triplets were dressed in matching white outfits, their tiny faces peaceful and innocent. Clara held them close, drawing strength from their warmth, from the weight of their small bodies against hers. They were her reason for everything, her reason to fight, to survive, to win. And tomorrow, the world would see that. At Adrian's house, the wedding preparations were in full swing. Matilda had spared no expense, turning the estate into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. White flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing. Classical music in the garden. It was beautiful, extravagant, and completely hollow. Adrian stood in his room, adjusting his tie in the mirror, and he felt nothing. No excitement, no joy, no anticipation. Just a dull, heavy emptiness that had settled over him weeks ago and refused to lift. Veronica was beautiful, charming, exactly the kind of woman his mother had always wanted him to marry. She came from money, had the right connections, and knew how to navigate high society with ease. But she wasn't Clara. She didn't laugh at his jokes the way Clara used to. She didn't look at him like he was the most important person in the world. She didn't make him feel anything except the crushing weight of his own mistakes. "Adrian, darling, are you ready?" Veronica's voice drifted through the door, light and cheerful. Adrian forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm ready." But he wasn't. He wasn't ready for any of this. He was marrying a woman he barely knew to please a family that had destroyed the only person who ever truly loved him. And the worst part was, he had let it happen. He had been complicit in every lie, every cruelty, every moment of suffering Clara endured. And now it was too late to fix it. Downstairs, Matilda was in her element. She moved through the estate like a general commanding troops, directing staff, adjusting decorations, making sure everything was perfect. Rebecca and Louise hovered nearby, their excitement barely contained. "Do you think Clara will actually show up?" Louise asked, her voice dripping with anticipation. Matilda's smile was predatory. "Oh, she'll show up. She won't be able to resist. She'll want to see Adrian, to remind him of what he's losing. But what she doesn't realize is that we've already won. Adrian is marrying someone appropriate, someone who belongs in this family. Clara is nothing but a bad memory." Rebecca laughed. "I can't wait to see her face when she walks in and sees Veronica. It's going to destroy her." Matilda nodded. "That's the point. We need to remind her that she was never good enough, that she was always just a placeholder until Adrian found someone worthy of him. Today, she'll see that truth, and it will break whatever's left of her." But Matilda had no idea what was coming. She thought Clara was still the broken, scared woman they had thrown away. She had no idea that Clara had spent the last 6 weeks transforming into someone they couldn't touch, couldn't hurt, couldn't control. And when Clara walked through those doors, everything Matilda believed about power and control was going to shatter. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. The sun was bright, the sky clear, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of flowers. Guests began arriving at noon, filling the garden with laughter and conversation. Adrian stood at the altar, his hands clasped in front of him, his face blank. He watched people file in, watched them take their seats, watched the world move forward while he felt stuck in place, trapped in a life he didn't recognize. Then the whispers started. Adrian looked up and saw heads turning, people craning to see who had just arrived. And then he saw her, Clara. She walked through the garden entrance like she owned the place, her head held high, her expression calm and composed. She wore a gown that made her look like she had stepped out of a fairy tale, and in her arms were the triplets, all 3 of them dressed in white, looking like tiny angels. Behind her walked 2 men in dark suits, their presence making it clear that Clara wasn't someone to be trifled with. The entire garden went silent. Every eye was on her. Every breath was held. Clara moved through the crowd with grace and confidence, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the people who had once mocked her, judged her, dismissed her. And in that moment, they saw what they had refused to see before. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She was magnificent. Have you ever walked into a room and felt every single person's perception of you shift in an instant? Have you ever watched people realize they underestimated you and seen the fear in their eyes? Matilda's face went pale. Rebecca and Louise stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, unable to process what they were seeing. Adrian felt his heart stop. Clara looked different. Not just her clothes or her hair, but something deeper. She radiated power, confidence, authority. She looked like someone who had survived hell and came out the other side stronger. She looked like someone who couldn't be defeated. Clara walked directly to the front row, where a seat had been left empty, and sat down with her babies in her lap. She didn't speak. She didn't make a scene. She simply sat there, calm and composed, and waited. The entire garden buzzed with whispered questions. Who was she? Why was she here? What was going on? Matilda recovered first, her face twisting into a forced smile as she approached Clara. Clara, darling, what a surprise. I didn't think you'd actually come. Clara looked up at her, and her smile was polite but cold. I received an invitation. It would have been rude not to attend. Matilda's eyes flicked to the babies. You brought the children. How sweet. Clara's voice was steady. They deserve to see their father. Isn't that what your note said? Matilda's smile faltered. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the music started, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. She shot Clara one last look, part warning, part threat, then turned and walked back to her seat. Adrian stood at the altar, staring at Clara, unable to look away. Veronica appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her white dress, but Adrian barely saw her. All he could see was Clara, sitting there with their children, looking like everything he had lost and would never get back. And as the ceremony began, as vows were spoken and rings exchanged, Adrian realized something that made his chest tighten with regret. He had married the wrong woman. Again. The wedding reception had barely begun when Clara stood up, adjusted the babies in her arms, and walked toward the center of the garden where Adrian and Veronica were cutting the cake. Every eye followed her movement. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Clara stopped a few feet away from the couple, her expression calm and unreadable. Adrian turned, his face going pale when he saw her standing there. Veronica looked confused, glancing between Clara and Adrian, trying to understand who this woman was and why everyone was staring. "Clara," Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" Clara smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made everyone in the garden feel uneasy. "I came to give you a wedding gift, Adrian. Something I think you and your family deserve." She turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the garden like a bell. "My name is Clara. I was Adrian's first wife. Some of you may remember me. Some of you may have heard stories about how I left, how I abandoned my children, how I was unstable and unfit. I'm here today to tell you the truth." Matilda shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. "You need to leave. Now. This is a private event, and you're not welcome here." Clara didn't even glance at her. She kept her eyes on the crowd, on the faces of people who had once looked down on her, who had whispered about her behind her back, who had believed every lie Matilda told them. 6 weeks ago, Adrian and his family threw me and my newborn triplets into a snowstorm. It was below freezing. I had no coat, no phone, no money. Just 3 babies in my arms and a locked door behind me. I almost died that night. My children almost died. And do you know why they did it? The garden was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Clara continued, her voice steady and devastating. Because they believed I was worthless. They believed I had nothing to offer, that I was just a burden they needed to get rid of. What they didn't know was that 2 days before they threw me out, I had received a letter from my grandmother's lawyer. She left me $500 million and controlling interest in the Whitmore Real Estate Trust. The same trust that this family has been living off for the last 18 years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Matilda's face went from red to white in an instant. Rebecca and Louise looked like they had been struck by lightning. Adrian stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, unable to process what he was hearing. Clara reached into her purse and pulled out a document, holding it up for everyone to see. This is a legal order freezing all trust accounts and revoking the family's access to funds. As of 6 weeks ago, they have had no income, no distributions, no access to the properties they claim to own. Everything you see here today, this wedding, this estate, all of it is built on borrowed time and empty accounts. Veronica turned to Adrian, her voice sharp. "What is she talking about? Adrian, what is she talking about?" Adrian couldn't answer. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not the woman he had dismissed and belittled, but the woman she had become. Strong, powerful, untouchable. And he realized with crushing finality that he had destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. Matilda found her voice shrill and desperate. "She's lying. She's manipulating all of you. She coerced her grandmother into leaving her that money. She's unstable, dangerous, unfit to raise those children." Clara turned to face Matilda, and her expression was ice. "Is that what you're going to argue in court tomorrow? Because I have hospital records proving what you did to me. I have witness statements from the paramedics who found me freezing to death. I have security footage from the night you threw me out. And I have lawyers who are very eager to present all of that evidence to a judge." Richard appeared beside Clara, flanked by 2 attorneys, each carrying briefcases filled with documents. He addressed the crowd, his voice professional and authoritative. "My name is Richard Lawson, and I represent Clara Whitmore. Tomorrow morning, we will be in court for a custody hearing where the defendants, Adrian and Matilda, are attempting to gain custody of Clara's children based on claims that she is an unfit mother. However, what we will present to the court is a documented history of abuse, manipulation, and child endangerment perpetrated by the defendants. Additionally, we will be filing a countersuit for emotional distress, defamation, and attempted fraud regarding the Whitmore Trust. Matilda's voice was shaking now, all pretense of composure gone. You can't do this. You can't take everything from us. This family has built its reputation over generations. You're nobody, Clara. You're nothing. Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a level that only Matilda could hear. I was nothing when you had power over me. But you gave that power away the moment you threw me into the snow. And now, I'm everything you're afraid of. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising again. Tomorrow, the truth will come out in court. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty will be documented and presented to a judge. And when it's over, this family will have nothing. Not because I took it from them, but because they never deserved it in the first place. Clara adjusted the babies in her arms and turned to leave. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, people stepping back, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and fear. As she walked toward the exit, she heard Veronica's voice behind her, sharp and furious. Adrian, tell me she's lying. Tell me this isn't true. But Adrian said nothing, because there was nothing to say. It was all true, every word. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. News of the wedding confrontation had spread like wildfire, and reporters lined the hallway, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Clara walked in with Richard and her legal team, carrying the triplets with a calm confidence that made everyone stop and stare. She wore a charcoal gray suit, professional and composed, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, someone who made decisions that changed lives. Adrian sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his family, and they all looked like they hadn't slept. Matilda's makeup was smudged, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. Rebecca and Louise whispered frantically to each other, their eyes darting around the room like trapped animals. Adrian stared at the floor, his face pale and hollow. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Margaret Holloway was a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and surveyed the room with an expression that made it clear she had no patience for games. This is a custody hearing regarding 3 minor children, she began, her voice firm. I've reviewed the preliminary documents from both sides, and I have to say, this is one of the most disturbing cases I've seen in my career. Let's proceed. Gregory Mills, Adrian's lawyer, stood first. He was smooth polished, the kind of lawyer who knew how to manipulate emotions and twist facts. Your Honor, my clients are simply concerned parents who want what's best for their grandchildren. Ms. Clara has demonstrated instability, moving from place to place, refusing contact with the father, and using her recent inheritance to manipulate the situation. We believe the children would be better served in a stable, established household. Richard stood, his expression calm but deadly. Your Honor, if I may, the defendants claim Ms. Clara is unstable. Let's examine that claim. On the night of January 14th, Ms. Clara, who had given birth to triplets 2 weeks prior, was forcibly removed from her home by her husband and his family. She was thrown into a snowstorm with 3 newborn infants, no coat, no phone, no money, and no means of transportation. She walked through sub-zero temperatures for over an hour before collapsing at a gas station, where she was found by paramedics suffering from hypothermia. The babies were also treated for exposure. Hospital records confirm all of this. He placed a stack of documents on the judge's bench. We also have testimony from the gas station attendant, the paramedics, and the hospital staff, all corroborating Ms. Clara's account. Additionally, we have security footage from the defendant's home showing Ms. Clara being physically pushed out the door while holding her children. This is not instability, Your Honor. This is survival. The judge's expression darkened as she reviewed the documents. Gregory tried to interrupt. Your Honor, those circumstances were unfortunate, but Judge Holloway held up her hand, silencing him. Unfortunate? Mr. Mills, I'm looking at photographs of a woman who nearly froze to death because she was thrown out of her home in the middle of winter with 3 infants. I'm looking at medical reports documenting severe hypothermia and emotional trauma. There is nothing unfortunate about this. This is criminal. Matilda shot to her feet. She's manipulating you. She knew about the inheritance. She planned all of this. The judge's gaze shifted to Matilda, and her voice was ice. Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore. You will speak when spoken to, or I will hold you in contempt. Matilda sat, her face red with humiliation. Richard continued, Your Honor, the defendants have also filed a petition to overturn Ms. Clara's grandmother's will, claiming she coerced the elderly woman. However, the will was drafted 4 years ago and updated multiple times, all while the grandmother was of sound mind and under the supervision of multiple attorneys. There is no legal basis for their claim. This is simply an attempt to seize assets that were never theirs. The judge looked at Adrian. Mr. Whitmore, do you have anything to say for yourself? Adrian stood slowly, his hands shaking. He looked at Clara, at the babies in her arms, and for the first time, he saw what he had done. He saw the pain he had caused, the life he had destroyed, the woman he had betrayed. I was wrong, he said quietly. I was wrong about everything. I let my family manipulate me. I let them convince me that Clara was the problem, when she was the only good thing in my life. I don't deserve those children. I don't deserve her. And I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, but they changed nothing. Sorry I didn't undo the snowstorm. Sorry didn't erase the months of cruelty. Sorry was just a word, hollow and meaningless. Judge Holloway made her ruling swiftly and decisively. I'm granting full custody to Ms. Clara. The defendants will have no visitation rights unless Ms. Clara chooses to allow it, which, given the circumstances, I would not recommend. Additionally, I'm ordering a full investigation into the events of January 14th to determine if criminal charges should be filed for child endangerment and domestic abuse. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the room. Clara stood, holding her babies close, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Behind her, she heard Matilda's voice, shrill and desperate, screaming that this wasn't over, that they would appeal, that they would fight. But Clara didn't care. She had won, not just in court, but in every way that mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Clara's security team kept them at bay. She climbed into the waiting car, and as it pulled away, she looked out the window at the city she had once navigated as a victim. Now she moved through it as a survivor, a mother, a woman who had faced the worst humanity had to offer and emerged stronger. 6 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of her new home, a beautiful house with a garden where the triplets could play. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the yard. The babies were laughing, chasing butterflies, their faces full of joy and innocence. Clara watched them, her heart full, and she thought about everything she had survived. The cruelty, the betrayal, the snowstorm, the courtroom. All of it had led her here, to this moment of peace. Her grandmother had been right. Storms don't last forever. And when they end, the sky is clearer than it ever was before. Clara smiled, picked up one of her sons, and held him close. She had fought for this. She had survived this. And now, finally, she could rest. Because the woman they tried to destroy had become a woman who couldn't be broken. And that was the greatest victory of all. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption.